Hey everyone, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate demo for the piece I call Idle Talk. Now that's not a typo, I'm not talking idle, I'm talking about a Virtuoid idol who is named Sharon Apple from the anime Macross Plus. Now if you're not familiar with Macross Plus, it is an absolutely excellent anime from the 90s. I think it's one of the best. It's nice and short, and it really delivers the story with a nice economy that a lot of anime don't really do. It's also amazingly animated. So this character here is Sharon Apple. She is a Virtuoid, which is a very hard word for me to say, idol. So she basically is a hologram generated from a computer who performs music, and she takes on several different looks. A lot of these little versions of her are from a concert that happens in one of the episodes, and she takes on different looks depending on the song. Now, this is kind of what would be considered her main look, but this is a version from that concert that I really like. I like that it had this 80s vibe, and the song that actually plays during that point is very 80s. But I wanted to do my own take on this. So with all of that preamble done, let's get right into it. So I start sketching. This is something that I do a lot more these days than I used to, and you see it in several of my videos, but I just want to reference it, which is of course drawing the full figure of the character, even though I plan on cropping it. This helps me get the anatomy right. Sometimes what you'll see me do is I'll do the rough sketch as if the image is cropped, but then I'll zoom out so that I can do sort of like the tweaks to the anatomy and all that stuff. But here, we're just going straight for the sketch. Now, she's a little awkward. We'll be fixing that as the piece goes on. I didn't really know what the pose was I wanted her to be in, so I just kind of started working with that. Her hair is really bizarre. It looks super cute sometimes and super dorky other times, and trying to get like the exact right look for that is a challenge. So now that I have the rough positioned more or less how I want the whole illustration to be, I'm going to go through and start applying some tighter lines. Now, depending on how confident I am in the lines or that I have the right information that I need, I might not have to do this step. Although in this case, I didn't entirely know what I was going to do stylistically with this. Do I need lines? Do I not need lines? What I end up doing is rendering it out and then adding in lines later. By the way, if you just saw that really weird anomaly happen on screen, that's because I had some sort of a weird snafu with these files and I actually lost a bunch of my work, but I realized I could go through the time lapse and screen grab the time lapse. So that's what I did. I went through the time lapse to before it wasn't a file snafu. I had stupidly deleted layers. That's what it was. And that's why it was still captured in the time lapse. So I went back through, screen capped the time lapse, put it in as a multiply, and then redid the lines so that I had what I was looking for. So now here is where I'm also trying to make some decisions around how to get the look from the anime. Not the entire look, because I want to do this like rendered thing. It's not going to look cel shaded, but there are certain aspects that I wanted to make sure that I captured, like the fact that where her clothing is, in this case her like dress and her like long gloves, those are transparent, but there's a little bit of this like shadow or highlight thing going on in order to denote aspects of her form. So I wanted to make sure that I started capturing that now and thought about how I was going to build that, which I just decided to literally have them be cutouts and then later add those form definitions as their own layers, basically their own flats. In this scene in the concert, there's like a space, like a star field kind of behind her, but it's like a little subtle. It's not like a crazy over the top one. So eventually I put that in as well. Also, getting the right color for her hair was a little tough because I wanted it to have like a rich color to it, but I also wanted it to be accurate to the anime. So trying to find something where I could really get that temperature shift of going from like a purpley red into like more of a yellow. I ended up getting a little bit more of that purpley vibe in the shadow underside, like where we're seeing the other side of her hair under her bangs. Like that gets me a little bit of that purple, and then later we bring some of the yellow into the hair as well. What I'm hoping to achieve with this piece, and what I usually hope to achieve anytime I'm doing some sort of fan art, is to bring all of the elements to the piece that are me, that feel like they're things that I would naturally do, while also identifying what are the things that are important to capturing the original. Now that might sound like a no-brainer, but depending on how distant your look and feel is from the source material, you might have to just make some really interesting choices. Now, I think that this ends up working out pretty well. I think that while I certainly don't have this like pure anime style, I have elements of that, so I can bridge it pretty easily. But my general opinion of doing fan art is always trying to do something new. I'm not necessarily a fan of, and I don't want to besmirch anyone who likes doing this. I personally, when I do art, I'm not a fan of replicating what it looks like. I like something to be brought to it. So as I actually mentioned in the Janine Melnitz video, if you want to do the exact same style as the source material but then bring in design changes, I think that's really interesting. If you want to change the style but keep all of the designs the same, I think that's interesting. I think there's like, you just have to bring something, otherwise there's kind of no point in doing it. It's the same way I feel about when a band covers music. If the band does like this like pitch perfect cover and it's the exact, well, pitch perfect, that's, I didn't mean like exactly pitch, but you know what I mean. If the band does a perfect cover of it, then it's like, oh, good on you, but like we already have that song. And if a band does something that is really exciting and new with their cover, then there's an actual reason for that to have happened. And I think that that's kind of what I think people should strive for when they're doing fan art. That doesn't mean that they have to, because, you know, to each their own. That's just what I'm looking for, I guess. So here we're doing the AO pass, or the form shadow pass. Those who've watched me before know that I hesitate to call this an actual AO pass. I like to think of it more as an AO mixed with some other elements to just bring definition. The next pass I'll do is an actual cast shadow pass, where we just go in on a separate layer set to multiply, and we bang in the actual cast shadows, which are the big, chunky, hard-edged shadows. Now, they're not necessarily always hard-edged, because as the object is further away from the surface, the shadow will blur out, but that just doesn't happen in this focused of a environment. For my shadows in here, we are using like a purple, a very light pale purple set to multiply. As this piece goes on, I do slightly tweak some of these colors, and you're going to see that. That's because I'm trying to find what feels most like the original source material. Now, this character, as I said before, she takes on lots of different forms, but each one of those forms has like subtle differences, even in things that you might not think are different, like for instance her skin tone, or whatever you want to call it, since she's a hologram. I don't know if it's skin tone, but you know what I mean. So trying to make sure that that feels like it matches up with the source is important. So you'll see as this piece kind of goes on, a lot of these colors are going to get like really subtle tweaks to try and find what I'm looking for there. Sometimes it's really challenging to get reference for some of these things. I actually have this anime in multiple formats, but sometimes when I'm in the middle of just doing a quick piece, I'm not thinking about like getting out the DVD or getting out the digital file and getting to the point and finding it and all that kind of stuff. I'm just trying to like hit Google and find it real quick. So trying to get like a really good version of these things. It's the same challenge I actually had with the Janine piece. Here I had the pen in the scene, but I hadn't actually added the hand because I didn't know what I wanted to do there. And now that I'm at the point where I'm trying to finalize my flats and get my shadows, or not finalize my flats, sorry, get my shadows done, I'm like, oh, hey, let's get that hand in there. Let's have it holding the pen, or I think it's a pen, stylus, whatever. Reasonable facsimile of a pen. And so now we've got that hand in there. We need to start making sure that that hand is also established. So we'll get like the thumbnail and, you know, everything. Just go in and get all those details in there. In order to do this, it's actually pretty easy, since this hand is off to the side. If this was a new element that we would add on top somewhere, it would also be kind of easy, because with the select paint, select clear method that I use, I would just select this clear away from the shadows and then start painting. If you're unfamiliar with that methodology I'm describing, it is linked down below. There'll be a link in the description that says select paint, select clear. That's just a methodology that I use when I'm working specifically in Procreate to make sure that I can keep my layers under control. If I were working in Photoshop, I would be doing other tricks in order to keep everything so that I'm not destroying my shadow attempts. I did a video not that long ago where I actually it probably was a while ago now. I forgot that was kind of a while ago, where I broke down my difference in my layer management between Procreate and Photoshop. If you go through, you'll find it pretty easily. It's a girl with red hair eating a corn dog and a Viking character. They're both in the thumbnail, and I use each one of those pieces to kind of show how I do things. Now we're getting into what I call either helper shadows or support shadows. These are shadows that don't necessarily fit with the rest of my scheme in the way that I establish the shadows, but they are important for pushing the form. So we do under the nose, we do under the upper lip, we might do other areas as well. Sometimes I'll do like underneath the eyebrow, like the eye socket, basically, to try and emphasize the eye socket a little bit more. And sometimes I'll even do like the innermost flat part of the ear, so like that flat part as it's going into the actual ear hole. These are all hyper technical terms, by the way, don't forget those. And the reason why I put those in is they might not actually be perfectly accurate to the way a shadow might work on that surface, but it's more of like a symbol. I've talked about this before in other pieces, that you can sort of draw something either as a symbol or you can draw something truly representative. A symbol would be something like an anime eye, or at least what we consider a stereotypical anime eye. It might even be like the eye from like an eye from Schoolhouse Rock or something. It's something that's not necessarily taking into account the reality of an eye, but it's trying to be representative of one and come up with this like simple symbol that people recognize as an eye in order to expedite the process of creating that eye. That's usually why. And so when you're doing things like a shadow under the nose, maybe the nose wouldn't have a shadow underneath it in this particular lighting scheme, but it helps read as a nose when you do that. So now I'm working on the cast shadow, and the cast shadow is on its own layer. If you're counting so far, we have the form shadow, and then we have these little helper or support shadows, and now we're doing the cast shadow across everything. These are 3 separate layers, all for this particular piece using the same color, and what it does is it ends up simulating the idea of a shadow over another shadow, which then gives you that shape definition within the shadow, as well as shape definition when you're not in the shadow. There's other ways to do that, by the way. In fact, I don't always work in this method. I work in this method a ton in Procreate because I've established this mostly in order to save me layers. But like, for instance, you could also do this by cordoning off where your highlights are, or let's call it like mid to high, and where your shadows are. So let's call it mid-low or low-mid to low, like all the way down to your darkest value. And you're effectively painting in the shadows a certain set of values, and in the highlights a certain set of values, or in the higher part, I guess. So what this method is doing is we're essentially leveraging technology to do the same thing and let it do some of the work for us instead of having to do all of that. If you go back to some of my older pieces, or if you happen to be familiar with more of my Photoshop stuff, which I don't really talk about here because I like the fact that Procreate captures things and then I can talk about it. But if you go back and you look at some of that, you'll see me using those methodologies instead. Methodology of how you're painting things is about what you want that outcome to look like, as well as what you want the actual process, how you want that to go. And then if you've got technological constraints like we do on Procreate, you might work out certain things in your process in order to get around those. There is no universal correct process. There is no universal set of solutions for anything, really. The solutions in the process are about what you're building, how you're building it, things like speed that you want to have, like all of these different things. So don't get too wrapped up in whether or not you're doing the right thing. Just keep looking for those opportunities to make your process better for you or better for the thing that you're trying to build. And then you'll get a process that really works for you. Obviously, you can follow my process here if you want to. Try it out. I highly recommend trying it out. And if there's something about it that you don't really like, just make some adjustments. See if there's something that you can do to it. Otherwise, you might just go on to something completely different, and that's also fine. I usually do my bright rim lights in the shadow in order to bring some definition to the dark side and to really punch it up. But in the case of this piece, I wanted to mimic the anime more, which used more of the rim light thing on the bright side of the object. So that's what we've got going on here. Here I'm trying out some things to get some like scan lines and everything in here. I ultimately end up eliminating them, but you can see, you can just kind of see part of the process of me trying to get there. I wanted this to have a little bit of that 90s VHS vibe without taking away sort of like any type of high quality that the illustration might have. So you'll see me kind of play with that throughout. You'll also notice that those form shadows, sorry, this is different than my form shadows, the shadows that are used in order to express more of her form that are from the anime that I mentioned. They're in there now. They were basically a purple that was just lowered in opacity to match the color from the anime. We've got a really stylized highlight on her hair there, which is pretty fun. You can also see that I've gone in and I've put in a bunch of black lines in order to try and bring a little bit of that anime vibe and really punch up some of the forms. Here I'm probably adjusting something. Oh, I think I'm adding more of the form stuff. Yeah, that's what I'm doing right here, and I just tweaked some of the shapes in there as well. Added a little bit more of that stylized shine in her hair. Her eyes in the anime, in this particular form, don't have like a pupil, and while it killed me to not do that, I wanted that part to be kind of accurate. So you can start seeing at this point now that we've got all of these pieces kind of in that I'm tweaking, that I'm trying to find this balance between my style and making it really feel like it's coming from the anime, or that it's at least referencing the anime. In a second here, we'll have all of the layers turned off. We'll also get a little bit of a skin tweak towards a little bit of a pinkish, I think, come in. Yeah, a little bit. And this here is the final version. It also has a little bit of chromatic aberration on it, by the way. I forgot to mention that. So this was a blast. I love this anime, and most people, I think to draw like Isamu or Gold or somebody from the anime, and I thought it'd be fun to just draw her because I literally never have. So that's a wrap. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like or subscribe or all the things, comment, share, it helps, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the many places where you can find me.